So first of all, who am I? Well, my name is Christofer Dutz. I work as a senior IT consultant for a company called Codecentric. But I have always been sort of a total open source enthusiast. Currently, I'm sort of committer at 10 Apache projects, member of the foundation, and well, since sort of half a year, I'm allowed to call myself VP of Apache PLC4X. The thing is, being a senior IT consultant in a place near Frankfurt, it's sort of like, well, you work mainly for insurance companies and banks. But the thing is, I always liked it when things move, sort of. If there's an engine running, if you can sort of trigger anything, any movement or anything in the real world, I always loved that. And I thought, the industry is full of interesting opportunities. And for the past 2 years, it sort of started that the entire industry is everything about, it's all about Industry 4.0. Doesn't matter what you really think about the term Industry 4.0, but it always boils down to sort of cloud stuff, big data, machine learning. And I really wanted to do these types of industrial projects. And sort of, it looked like it should be quite a good idea to sort of get working in this stuff, because it doesn't really matter what you look for. The charts always sort of look the same. So what I did was, as well, there weren't very many industrial IoT projects out there, I started a test balloon. I did that by sort of just submitting a paper, building SCADA systems with open source to ApacheCon in Miami. Yeah, one of the people on the picture is sitting down there. First of all, ApacheCon Miami, that was really awesome. And what I really liked was sort of, it was, for me, it was a test balloon. I had no idea, was the talk going to be accepted? Well, okay, that was settled pretty fast. But is anybody going to show up? And it turned out, well, it was a full house. And I got lots and lots of positive responses. Even after the conference, I kept on getting contacted by people asking me, is this going to happen now? I really need this. So having an idea is one thing. Having the opportunity to do it is a different one. So I was sort of lucky, because the company I work for, they had something called innovation budget. It's sort of like a certain percentage of the revenue sort of goes into a fund, and if you've got a good idea, you can apply for this. And well, it happens to be that I was one of the first people to get access to this budget. And it was the idea to build an open source library for communicating with industrial hardware. Initially, they gave me 6 months for initiating the project, and I got to start working on it in October 2017. We never really thought of doing this sort of like a closed source thing, because first of all, we're all pretty focused on open source. And sort of building a product, well, then you have to have all the sales, you have to have this support, and all this stuff that, well, tech guys usually don't have that much fun with. But open source, that's a thing we knew. So it was our idea to simply do this and sort of earn some money with the contracts that we get after that. So was nice. The 6 months, they got a little bit extended. So for the past 2 years, I've been working 100% of my time on Apache PLC4X. So, but as we're not really talking about the project itself, but how we got things into the incubator, well, one of the things you always have to do is find a name for the thing you want to do. So, same as with incubating projects, well, you can come with any name into the incubator, but if you ever want to graduate, you have to have a real name. And it's sort of not like just picking, I want to do Apache Foo. You really have to do some research. And so here you've got a little screenshot of one of the pages I created. I think the name list was sort of 200 names long. I started with, I had the idea, I wanted a catchy name. I always loved projects that have names sort of around animals, because if you've got an animal name, you get to get an animal mascot, and I always loved animal mascots. Don't ask me why, I just wanted it that way. So I was looking for animal names with a P, an L, and a C in it. Yeah, I found stuff like pelican, sort of pelicans. I don't think, I hope no pelicans offended, but I sort of don't think pelicans are cute. But then I found a palm civet. So first idea was, well, let's call it Apache Palm Civet. Sort of, name wasn't taken. There wasn't any usage of that outside of in the software sector, so that would have been safe. But in the end, we decided, yeah, well, even if Palm Civet is sort of cute, it's sort of a stupid name for a project. So in the end, we sort of decided to go for a technical name. As we're talking to PLCs, well, let's call it PLC4J. But we didn't want to talk to only via Java, but also others. So, let's call it PLC4X. And what you can see here is sort of all the research we did. Sort of, you can see PLC weld, PLC control, PL controls, all the sorts of stuff. But in order to pick a name, it sort of has to be not a registered trademark in the US, in Europe, in India, in China. And you're sort of expected to sort of do a little research on GitHub, on SourceForge, and all these platforms, if there's sort of not an excess usage of this, because then it would be hard for Apache to sort of protect the trademark. Well, PLC4X, there was only a company in Russia, had in the end of the 80s, they had a little device to attach their proprietary hardware to some other proprietary hardware, and that thing was called PLC4X, but it wasn't used that much. So in the end, we settled with PLC4X. We decided to do that early because renaming is really evil. I've seen that once or twice with Apache projects. To rename it, you have to change all the group IDs and Maven, the artifact IDs. You have to change the packages. You have to change the documentation. So we wanted to start with this real. So also deciding about names. Well, you got to set up your toys. As we're talking to real hardware, well, we sort of set up an IoT lab in our office. Sort of just screwed some of these rails on the walls and just plugged on the hardware, set up a little network, and set up a VPN that you could dial into. So that was sort of the kickoff. As I said, I always loved cute animals as project logos, so having started this in a commercial company, you get access to shared services, so I got to ask our designer to sort of develop something. And if I had known how much work designing a logo like this is, I probably would have not asked her to, but she literally drew hundreds and hundreds of sketches. This is just a little part of what she did. I've got a bigger picture, and her whole desk is full of pencil sketches, different versions. But in the end, this was TODDY. We called him TODDY because sort of a palm civet in English is called a toddy cat. So we just stuck with a TODDY. That's why he's named that way. So he's really great for T-shirts and swag, stickers, and stuff like that. So that is important. But project is not only a name, a logo, and stuff like that. Well, you also have to do things. And the strange thing is, you can't sort of start a project at Apache without having a single line of code or something like that. You sort of have to seed it outside and then bring it in. It would have been possible to set it up at Apache, but it would have taken jumping a lot more hoops. So we just decided to set it up in our company and just start coding. So October 2017, well, we had our first version of PLC4X that was able to talk to an S7 device. Well, actually, this picture is fake because that was the celebration to the second driver we did, but oh well. If I don't tell anyone, nobody knows. So after we had sort of a little bit of source code, we had our first drivers, we had our first integration modules, the next step was preparing for incubation. So the first thing you have to do is find some mentors. I would suggest to choose mentors that are sort of a pain in the ass, because the more you get done in the beginning, the less you have to do later on. So being a little bit masochistic, I asked Justin to be our champion. So the champion is sort of, in the set of mentors, it's the person who officially creates the accounts to set up the repositories. I think the only reason is that if you've got 4 mentors and everybody creates the same repositories at the same time, it sort of sucks. So that's why you have to find a champion. And then you start preparing the incubation proposal. So you start writing the text, you go through it with your mentors, and as soon as that's done, you just discuss the proposal on the incubator mailing list. So we ended up entering incubation on December 28th, 2017, with our champion, Justin McLean. And the other mentors were Greg Trasuk, Luciano Rosende, and Stefan Bodevic. And the reason I asked Justin to join was I knew how he sort of has really detailed looks at the stuff he released. So I think at the Podling Shark Tank in Vegas, there was this new measure for being a real podling. So people were treated as, well, you're a real podling if Justin voted -1 on you. Yesterday, we found out sort of that was the one thing we failed because we actually never ever got a single -1 from Justin during the whole incubation process. So it is good to get the difficult or not the difficult, but the ones that really do their job intensely, try to get those mentors. So, being accepted for incubation is one thing, but now you have to sort of start incubation. You do that by sort of, if you started at a company and you started working during your working hours, well, your company has to file a CCLA, just because if you sign an ICLA, you sort of contribute everything you do to Apache. But if you've got a signed working contract, well, you also signed that everything you do during your work time goes to the company. So the CCLA just sort of settles this and says, yeah, well, everything somebody does during the working time for an Apache project belongs to Apache. So that was the first thing you had to do. After that, well, you have to sort of sign a software grant that the company sort of donates officially the code base. And everyone who's going to participate in the project who hasn't signed an ICLA first, well, that's what they have to do then. So as soon as all the paperwork's done, you get a Git repository at Apache, and well, that is sort of the simplest thing. Yeah, you just change the remote, push it, and your stuff is in Apache. What's a little more difficult is sort of getting your build automated build to run on Apache infrastructure. Because, well, just having we started with GitLab. So if you move from GitLab to Jenkins, well, you have to sort of define those Jenkins files. And, well, you have to keep all the little things in mind that sort of may be special on the Apache infrastructure. So another suggestion I would give to you if you're looking for a mentor, take one mentor that is sort of strong on the legal side, and then take another one who's really good on understanding the infrastructure. Because getting those builds to run smoothly, it might be a little challenging at the beginning. As I said, I did all the research for the podling name search first, but you still have to do the official one. It's sort of like, yeah, we want to name our project like this. Here we did all this research on it. It's sort of not dangerous to use this name. And well, in the end, if you get your podling name search Jira issue sort of approved, well, then you're allowed to sort of use that. Usually you have to do this before graduating. We did it initially. We also got our first version of the website online, and we started, everybody was signing up to the mailing lists and moving things to the mailing lists. Have to admit, if you start a project in a company, and you start moving to the mailing lists at Apache, this is what I've discovered is the most challenging thing. It's not technology, it's people. Getting people to discuss things on a mailing list, that is what I find the most difficult part. Yeah, so unexpected challenges, well, getting all PPMC members to register to the mailing lists, as I said. Yeah, my non-Apache colleagues, yeah. There was sometimes a colleague sitting next to me, and he was always discussing things with me. And I said, please take this to the list. And he never did it, till I finally said, yes, I have an answer for you, but I'm not going to give it to you if you don't write it to an email. So he was sort of writing me an email, and I was responding. We were sitting 2 meters apart, but this seems to have been the only way to get him to actually do it. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we started with sort of 10 to 12 volunteers when I asked in my company. Sort of, they all stuck up their hands. Yeah, sure, I'm in it. In the end, we were sort of 2 that were really active. So, having done all the paperwork, everything's set up, well, then you have to do a lot of coding. But let's say coding, I would say, is sort of 1/3 of the work I had to do in 2018. I'm intentionally saying I, because in the beginning it was sort of just mainly me. I was writing emails, a lot of emails, because if it's not on the list, it didn't happen. Even if you're on your own, you sort of should sort of define what's sort of going through your head, because if you don't do that, who should be joining in? So I was writing emails. I was responding to my own emails. Sometimes on the next morning, I was even sort of replying to my own emails with, that's maybe not such a good idea. Maybe we should do it this way. I started talking about PLC4X at meetups. I started submitting talks to this topic for any conference that came across me. I thought, I just have to fire talks at every conference. Maybe 1 or 2 will get accepted. Well, I ended up doing a little more than 1 or 2. I was touring through Germany talking to companies interested in the topic. So I went to industrial fairs and went through the rows and I talked to companies, is this something interesting for you? If they said yes, I visited them. We did little workshops there. I started writing articles for newspapers. I wrote articles for blogs, well, and even more, a little bit coding. So, March 2018, well, I got my first article on PLC4X and Apache Agent on the cover of a magazine. Yeah. So, that was I was pretty surprised to see that. So this article was the first one who really got companies calling us, because we were really talking about solving real problems they were having. So growing a community is one thing, growing interest in the product is a different one, but both are very important. And sort of I was thinking of how can I sort of, well, this PLC4X, this industrial communication thing, this open source in the industry, it's sort of something totally new. And things that are totally new, you usually have to sort of make stick. So I thought, I have to do something to sort of be remembered, that people remember me. So I made a real toddy. There was this company in the US called Dutz, where you could sort of, if you've got kids and they sort of squiggled some creature, you can have it produced. Well, I sent them the SVG from our project logo and had made a real toddy. And so the real reason why that happened was, I think it was Shane in ApacheCon in Vancouver. He was running around with this yellow elephant. The Hadoop elephant. And I just remembered that whenever I think of that ApacheCon, I always keep thinking of Shane running around with that elephant. And I thought, why is that happening? So I did a little research. And the thing is, if you do something that is sort of slightly out of the ordinary, people get surprised. And if people get surprised, they remember what sort of made them surprised. And if you sort of in a tight time area around this surprise, you tend to get remembered easily. And well, if you run around an industrial conference with a plush animal, first of all, well, you're the strange nut job running around with a plush animal. But it's always the plush animal you would definitely want to bring home for your kids, or you just want one yourself. So you start asking, hey, what's with the cat? Oh, well, you ask for it, got a 5-minute PLC4X pitch. And, well, in the end, you just started to get remembered. Did a lot of traveling, have to admit, running around with a plush animal. You get a lot of smiles, and people are much kinder to you. Yeah, so sort of July 2018, something strange happened. I mentioned I was talking to myself, replying to my own emails, but all of a sudden this happened. So this is a sort of email statistic. And well, this is sort of me probably talking to myself, maybe Justin sort of agreeing or mostly disagreeing with things. And then all of a sudden people started joining in. There was new people coming in. There was an insane amount of texting at the moment, and I have to admit that was the time when I sort of really felt like I think if you're a parent and your kid is doing the first steps, I think this must sort of be as proud as you are when you see something like this. So around that time, first people started showing up on the lists, started submitting bug reports, and bug reports mean, well, they tried it out. They started submitting pull requests. Yeah, on 24th September, we voted in our first new PPMC member. And just 2 months later, we had our first community meetup. So Julian and his company sort of invited us to the area near Stuttgart, and we had our first community meetup. And from then, things started getting sort of more, getting faster and faster, because just sort of a month later, we used something, well, at CodeCentric we have sort of a, let's say it's a co-working space, it's a finca on Mallorca, and we can sort of just book that for a week and just go there and just sort of lock the doors. Well, first bring in the beer, then lock the doors, and just get shit done. And that's what we did. So, well, you can see on the table, well, we were doing a lot of coding, API discussions, experimenting with new hardware and stuff, yeah. And we were processing a lot of really new input, but, well, also a lot of beer. But the thing is, that sort of seeded what I would call the PLC4X community, because it was sort of our first hangout together. And that's why I think stuff like ApacheCons, if you're talking to people on emails all the time, that's one thing. You get to know somebody, but I think you really get to know someone if you meet them, if you talk to each other. And that's what I love at ApacheCons. Yeah, so shortly after we came back from Mallorca, we had our first release. So it was on 5th of October. After that, sort of, the RC1, I had to cancel myself because I noticed that I had no notice. So glad I did that, because otherwise, well, Justin would have voted -1, but I was faster. Also, sort of around that time, we had our first major proof of concepts. So what you can see here is sort of a $60 setup of a Raspberry Pi with an aluminum casing. And that sort of replaced, I think, a 800,000 euro proprietary software, and that was a lot faster. So adoption started. This was in Berlin in November last year. I was speaking at a conference, and I couldn't believe when I saw people sitting in the audience with their laptops open, and I recognized the PLC4X logo. So I started getting a feeling that people are actually interested in what we're doing. So in total, 2018, I had 17 talks at conferences and meetups. I visited 4 industrial fairs where I sort of went around every booth, talking to everyone who wasn't sort of up in the trees when I counted to 3. Had 2 articles in IT magazines, 3 blog posts, and we really formed a really great team. And I have to admit, I found lots and lots of new friends. A lot of the people in the PLC4X project, they were completely new to Apache, so we had to do a little of this teaching of the Apache way, but sort of there were experienced Apache members involved in the project, so that was quite easy. And well, let's say the individuals that came, they sort of naturally sort of dug that way. So that was really great, and sort of, yeah, I would be very sad if I sort of lost any of these people I met. So first 4 months of this year, well, we were working hard on creating C++ drivers, Python drivers, C# drivers, especially driver generation. But I'd say sort of the thing that sticks out was the pre-graduation work. Yeah, if you want to graduate, there's a big checklist of things you have to do. It's sort of like releases have to be done this way. You have to be sure that your website has all the necessary information, that everything is sort of done the right way. So a lot of the work was sort of a little bit, oh, well, it's not as satisfying as writing a new driver, but sort of getting all these check marks sort of green. And on sort of around beginning of April, I was able to sort of send out, do all the stuff. And you can see that I was very anxious to sort of do that because there were 199 top-level projects as the ASF at the time the vote was over. So I was sitting there with my clock, waiting till the 72 hours passed, and I think I submitted it maybe 10 seconds after that passed. So I had, I think I had up there, I had the emails with the results of the vote. That was the email I prepared to Sally to start cranking up the marketing machine. And down there I had the submission for the board agenda to sort of put us in the for the next board meeting to graduate. Yeah, I think on the third screen I just had some good music. Yeah, so everything went well, and 17th of April 2019 we became the 200th top-level project of the ASF. And that's when things started to get really interesting, because sort of 2 or 3 days after all this publicity stuff went out, so the ASF sent out an official announcement. And shortly after that, you send out a blog post on the ASF blog. Then all the companies sort of involved, we all had sort of blog announcements prepared. They were all sort of synced to sort of be sent out in a certain sequence. And I started being called by guys from Microsoft, from SAP. That was a totally crazy week, and I think I didn't code a single line in that week because I was just phoning and calling people, writing emails. And one of the calls was somebody from the European Commission, because they were doing this EU FOSSA 2 project where they invited Apache projects to sort of come together and work together. And, well, we were one of the lucky projects that got to do this trip. Yeah. So, have to admit, that was a lot of fun. And then on the 24th of May 2019, we had our first release as a top-level project. By the way, that's me in the crocodile on the street parade, I think. Yeah, so doing one thing, doing a thing you believe is interesting doesn't always mean that other people think that way. But if we log into our Apache Nexus, we have this cool thing that we can sort of see how on Maven Central the download statistics are for our projects. So when I signed in and had a look at what PLC4X was doing, I was really happy. We were sort of up to almost 7,000 downloads per month. For a pretty new project, that was quite an achievement, I think. So in total, my summary for the incubation, well, creating a new project is a lot of work. It's not just about the coding. I'd say community building is even harder than building code. But also, I have to say, if I managed to talk to a new device, I did a little victory dance, and then I felt good. But when I saw the community starting, having people show up at our meetings, doing these trips together, meeting at ApacheCons, that is far more rewarding than any driver I could write. going through incubation together sort of tightens community, I'd say, because it sounds sort of bad, but you're all fighting the same fight together. You all have to do the same thing. And it's sort of, at least it felt this way for me, that this really brought the community together. You get to know a lot of new people. Most of these, I'd even say all of the people now involved in the PLC4X project, which I met through the PLC4X project, I would call friends. If they sort of come nearby my place, sure, you're safe to crash on my couch. And in the end, I was even surprised that this whole process can sort of be fun. So, looking back, I do have some suggestions for the existing podlings or the podlings that will start coming up. Invest a lot of time in community building. And don't put up too many rules up front. There are 1 or 2 incubating projects that start with, let's say, 5 or 6 members, and they start, yeah, we'll review, then commit everything in a feature branch, and 3 people have to sign before merging, and stuff like that. But that's what you need if you've got a big project. But guess what? You're not. You're a small project. So don't start by sort of copying what the huge projects are doing. Just because the Maven project does it that way, it doesn't mean you have to do it that way. My suggestion is just put up rules, start without rules, and then start putting up rules when they make sense. If you notice that commit quality is poor, then say, discuss it on the list, switch to review, then commit. Otherwise, I don't see any point in that. You just sort of raise the barrier for new people to come in. Invite people early. You don't have to sort of submit pull requests for 2 years just to be proven that you're worthy. Just invite people early, because then they start getting really active. Yeah, as I mentioned, don't do things like the big ones. You're not. And one real big of advice I would like to give you is accept advice from your mentors. I mentioned we were project number 200. Well, formally we wouldn't have been, because there was another podling that sort of ended the vote before us, sort of 1 or 2 weeks. But during the incubation process, they were always complaining, and they explicitly asked not mentors to not interfere with their doings. So I did notice that they sort of finished the vote, they submitted the result, but they forget to add it to the board agenda, and that's what counts. So I just shut up. I wasn't interfering. I got to submit number 200, and well, if they had listened, maybe they would have been number 200. So, what's to come? I guess this applies to every Apache project, not only incubating ones. Growing of the community. Okay, adding new languages will probably not apply to everyone, but for us, we want to support more programming languages. We want to add support for new protocols. And especially all this working with other projects, because a lot of projects I've seen out there, they're sort of just concentrated on doing their thing. But a project like PLC4X, it's sort of a framework. It's sort of in between. I always say it's the missing puzzle piece. But that means it's not a picture on its own. It becomes part of a picture if you put it in place. And this only works if you sort of make it possible to integrate this puzzle piece into other people's picture. So you have to start working together with other projects. That was why I initiated this mailing list. I think this is one of the first Apache mailing lists that are sort of topic-centric. So the IoT@apache.org mailing list is a mailing list sort of to enable projects or people interested in the general topic of IoT to communicate with each other. Currently, a lot is happening at the Eclipse and the Linux foundations. And so I'm also doing quite some work in sort of trying to reach out to these. I think yesterday I had a talk with Roman with the LF Edge Eve project. I think if we all work together, we can really sort of kick some ass in the industry. So, thanks for listening. I think I was on time. So, are there any questions? Yeah.
This is really great, Chris. Congratulations. It's a great story. The thing that I don't understand, though, is I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that CodeCentric is a sort of a financial services, insurance-focused company, yet they sponsored this. They paid for you to do this work for 2 years and maybe some other people. What's their angle in it?
CodeCentric is sort of like a consulting, IT consulting company. So we've got all the sort of experts in big data, machine learning, cloud stuff. And we really would like to stop doing, well, that's my opinion. But we would sort of like to do less for banks and insurance companies and perhaps more for robots and production lines.
So you convince them to buy into your vision.
Yeah. So currently, it wasn't possible for us to offer services to the production industry because we were just not able to talk to their hardware. It was sort of a closed ecosystem. And PLC4X was the missing puzzle piece that let our open source IT world talk to the operational OT world of the industry. And as we thought, well, the cake is so big and the demand is so high, it doesn't really care if our competitors could also use PLC4X to do that, because we just knew, come on, that market is so huge. Any other?
Thanks for the presentation. I would like to know how have been your relationship with the industry giants, Siemens, all these guys, because I guess that you are entering in a quite close world, let's say, and maybe, I don't know, you are like challenging them or putting them at risk. I don't know exactly, yeah. So I would like to know a bit about that.
That's actually a really, really good question, because it also shows something why it's good to sort of do something like this under the hood of a foundation and not under the hood of, we'll just say, a private repository at GitHub or a public repository at GitHub. Because let's say the responses from the industry, it was sort of very different. Some sort of, let's say, I can name them, Beckhoff, Vago, Phoenix Contact. When I contacted them, even Mitsubishi, so when I contacted them, they said, this is a great idea. What do you need? They provided us with specifications. They even gave us grants to use the specification to implement drivers. They all gave us hardware. Come on, they were sending in, packets were coming in with industrial hardware. They were just giving it to us because they believed in that. There were other companies, and usually the bigger and older ones, namely sort of, I think, the ABB guy threatened to sue me when I visited their booth. Siemens was sort of a little bit strange. They sort of tended to switch between, can we use your stuff and I will sue you? It was sort of like, depending on who you talk to, it was either the one or the other. Generally, they don't like us, because I think the project has potential to ruin quite a bit of their business plans, but I have to admit, I don't really care about that. Yeah, and the thing is, if we had done this, for example, in GitHub, or in a CodeCentric hosted repository, the thing I was really afraid of was I made sure that everything we did was legally absolutely correct. But being legally correct is one thing. Getting nuisance lawsuits is a different thing. So the thing I was sort of afraid of was even that if I was doing everything correct, having to go to court every now and then, getting a lawyer, doing all the preparation work, and sort of that it would sort of start keeping me from doing the work I wanted to do, just because they were, oh, well, what does a big company care by just sort of filing one lawsuit after the other? The good thing being at Apache, well, as soon as a letter comes in with a lawsuit, I can say, hey, come on, redirect this, please, to the Apache Software Foundation. And I think I think big companies sort of would think twice before doing that. Any other? Well, then thank you for coming. I hope you learned something. And I'm going to be hanging around. I'm going to be the one with a cat.
Thank you, everyone.